Hello everyone, Jakekub here. Today we are doing the making of Pathfinder UHC Season 11. This right here. So this intro, actually, it looks rather simple, but it's actually quite complicated when we get into the nitty-gritty. There's a lot of layers and a lot of things going on. So let's just jump right into it. First off, we have the background, and once again, I'm using sequences. I used sequences in, I believe it was Paradox Season 1 intro. But basically what a sequence does, it is, when I click on it here, it brings me to a separate timeline where it's just this background, really. But then when I put it into a sequence and drop it into here, I can split it and put effects on it without having to, like, it's basically like giving me a fresh thing without any cuts or anything, even though there may be cuts, like, when you dig deeper into the actual sequence. Probably not the best explanation for it, but whatever. So what this background book is, it literally just fades in. That's really all there is to it. Now, we have two layers to this, right? We have so first off, we have the background, right? And then we have the book, and then we have the book, but with a drop shadow. And the drop shadow angle is something like that. Those are the numbers. It looks good. Numbers don't really matter too much to me. I believe, actually, yep, I have to scroll down. So there's also this layer here, which is just the background. It's found it on Google. It's a nice wooden background. The vibe that I wanted to go for with this intro was you're opening a book on a wooden table. And maybe the leaves don't represent that the best, but it added a nice touch to it. So here's that's the basic background, right? It's the background, and then you have the book with the drop shadow. And the drop shadow, it's trying to follow the angle that the drop shadow of the leaves are making. So as you can see, it's like going downwards to the left, which is the shadow that the leaves were making, for nice continuation's sake. So that's the background sequence. And now that we're on the main timeline here, we have, it's going to scale inwards, basically, and rotate. So what this does is, you see the nice background as it's fading in right here, with the leaves and stuff. But then if you're trying to look at an intro from this angle, like if I didn't have all of this scaling effects going on, then, like, let's see, this is up to 170. If I bring this back to 100, you can see how, like, far out it is. I also do the rotation, kinda just to make it more animated, I guess. A straight zoom in, it works, but the small rotation definitely added to it, in my opinion at least. So now we get into the part where the players come in. At this same time, we have a green screen effect with multiple effects on it. So if I remove this Ultra key and change it to normal, you will see that this is a sunray, basically. It's a green screen sunray filter. And this overlays the entire intro, basically. It's at 20% speed, because otherwise it wouldn't fit the whole intro. So that's what it looks like. And then I put the soft light blending mode on it to make it look good. Then we have a little bit of brightness and Gaussian blur on it. I don't know. I feel like it worked. They don't make a terribly large difference, to be honest. But if I get rid of this in total, like, you can see the difference it makes. Once again, the sun rays coming from the top right corner, going down towards the bottom left to kind of make sense of the drop shadow that's going on. I think that's mostly it for the background and stuff. So let's move on to the players and the text in the book. So you'll see once again we have sequences for the teams. If I open up this team, you'll see that all that is in here is the 3 renders. So what I do is I position them in this timeline here, the Team 1 sequence timeline. And then I bring this timeline into the main timeline. That's the usefulness of sequences, because it helps conserve space as well. So what I use this sequence for is the 3 player arts, but at the same time, so what I would do, how I got these to work is, originally I had it set up on this layer here, to figure out the positioning of where I wanted the renders to be. And then I would bring them into their own sequence, keeps the positioning. And then what I did is I added the tint effect. So on the 3 beats that there are, I have the players go from black and white to color, basically. That's all there is to that. Just having the players pop in all at once, and having the names pop in on every beat, it felt a little bit off. So having it go from black and white to color at the same time that the player names come in, I feel like it worked. It added. So that's about it for the renders. I guess the only other thing I can say, actually, I don't think there's anything else to it. I think it's really just, yeah. There is a drop shadow, which you can't see I mean, you can kind of see it. It's there. And then I also have this color preset, which adds a little bit of contrast to it. Because this is already a rather contrasty intro in the first place with the drop shadow and the sun rays. So I feel like this just added necessary color. The player renders looked extremely desaturated without it. I feel like it fit the brown theme that I was going for, basically. So let's see. That mostly goes for all the other teams as well. It's the transition if I go into team 2, it's the tint at 100%, and then it's no tint, basically. There really isn't that much more to it. It goes from black and white to color on the beat for every other team. And it was just positioning the renders on this timeline and then bringing them into their own sequence. So I'll go over the text now. The text, it's rather simple at first, because it's as simple as a crop effect, basically. And because I have the text on an angle, the crop is going to come in from an angle, like it should. And it goes from 80% down to 0%, basically. Now, I didn't need to do that, because as you can see, I'm at 18% right here, and Greeples' full name is still there. But for consistency's sake, just in case someone has a longer name, I went from 80 to 0. 80 was a number that usually worked well enough for me. So that's that. I have an edge feather 100 on the text to make it look more smooth and faded. The other thing you'll notice is that the team names are going to come in first. As you can see, the team name is already fully out by the time that Greeples is just starting to come out. The text for the team names is also a lot darker. I don't know what font the text is. I worked with Quill on this intro hand in hand, and he was the one that made all the text, because text is usually not my strong suit. I usually either overdo it or it doesn't look good, but I think it looks good or whatever. But I had Quill to help me out with that, pick out a good font and colors and all that. So yeah, basically it's really just that simple, that there's just a crop effect that goes from right to left for all the text. When the book layout is like this. Now, when we go to the next team, I'll use Chloe's text as an example. It's just on the other side of the book now, and it's just gonna fade from right to left. It's just different positioning of the text, basically. And also different scaling depending on the size of the name, I believe. As like for here, Break Salad is at 55, Greeples is at 60, Kevin is at 60. There's some other examples, I believe. Nihon's at 55, I'm at 60. Butter Golem is at 50 over there. So that was the scaling of the text, was to try and make it match better. I think the most obvious example would be with Joey over here. Joey is at a 50, but if I set this to Merrick's is at 70, for example. If I set Joey to 60 here, it really just looks kind of off with having him in the middle. But if I set it to 50, it looks much more balanced. So yeah, I think that's about it with text. Now, here, well, that's not about it with the text. This is where the text gets interesting. So we have the book page turn transition, and this took me quite a while to figure out. But what happens here? It's 10 and 10. There's 10 frames to fade out, 10 frames to fade in. So with each frame, the book is going to start to fade over. So that was a look at it frame by frame, if you care. Now, what really starts to happen is, as this right here, this is Team 2 and Team 1. So because we're transitioning into Team 2, I need Team 2 to start appearing at this transition, because if I only start right here, the full Team 2 team has to be in place on this frame. But when you're looking right here, that page is already somewhat visible. So I needed to bring the Team 2 transition, or the Team 2 sequence, further back before these players are even gone. So you can see both teams kind of at the same time, if you think about it. So when we're going from the first team, where the players are on the left and the text is on the right, all the pages are always going to turn towards the left, because that's just how you read a book. But the hard thing is when one time, for the first team, you're swiveling the text. But when we go to the next team, where the players are on the right, and we're doing the book transition, then the players need to move with the book. So there's a little bit different keyframing for that. So I guess I can go into what makes this transition actually works. I'm going to go into the background book sequence, and I had to sync this up with the markers. So what happens is we have these two. We have a basic 3D, and we have a crop. So what the crop does, I'm not great at explaining this. So normally this top layer has the drop shadow enabled, but I have to have it disabled here, because if I have it enabled, it kind of contorts the book a little bit. Especially because this bottom layer also has the drop shadow enabled. So what happens then? The basic 3D, this is the swivel effect. This is what makes the book rotation work. But the problem is, this book, both sides of the book is one image. So if I disable the crop, you see where the issue comes in. But when I put it to 50% on the left, it makes it so it's only turning one page of the book. Now, when I split, when you hit the middle of the transition, you can't see that invisible page. It's technically there, but it's not there. So when I go over to this side now, the crop is going to be on the right instead of from the left to have the book come down. And once again, it's just the swivel effect. It's going from 270 degrees to 360. Over here, it goes from 0 to 90. The reason we stop at 90 and 270 is the way angles work. I'm not going to try and explain that. But that's basically how I got the transition to work with the book, at least. But that's only part of the book flip transition. The other part is that the sequence, the background book page flipping is its own sequence, and I can't just copy paste the keyframes over. So I needed to individually keyframe all of this other stuff. So as you can see over here, by the time, this is the Team 2 that I'm clicked on right now. So Team 2 is going to start appearing. It's 100% disguised by the crop right now, as you can see. But when I go over to this frame, I have it at 79, and you can start to see a player. Then you can start to see Chloe. Then you can see the full team. I had to do this for every single layer that goes up here, which is very time consuming. But in the end, it was well worth it. For the player text, we have Greeples. It starts at this position right here, which is where it defaults to. Once again, we have the swivel, which makes the text turn. But instead of using crop, I have to use the positioning here. Because when I don't have to do the positioning when it's coming out, because when the renders are hidden behind the page, you can't see it. And to make it visible, I use the crop. when the text is already there, I need to move the text. I don't need to make it visible. So I need to move it out of the frame. And in combination with the swivel, moving the positioning is what made that work. And I just had to individually keyframe most of this for the most part. And that's how the transitions worked for every team. There really wasn't too much more to it. I'll go over to this team because it is a little bit different when we go to the second team for the book flip transition, because this time it's the renders that are moving. So as you can see, let's see, that's the text. So, this is team 2 right here. And it actually, the way it works with the way it works with the renders, actually, I don't know why, but I didn't have to do anything with the positioning because it kind of just worked. I mean, it doesn't look as clean when you go frame by frame, but when you're looking at it like super fast, like you can't really notice a difference, really. So I don't have to individually keyframe all of that here. Now, once again, let's see. I don't know why I have these crop keyframes here, actually, now that I think about it. That's why. They don't do anything, because the crop... yeah, I have the crop effect disabled. That's why. That makes sense. The text, because it's on the left side of the book, it doesn't do anything for these first 10 frames, because it's not being taken over by this other page until you get to the second half of transition. And that's where it starts to fade away. So as you can see, we have the crop. I'll click on... Fairy's text has to be placed down here. Just the way that... it's definitely not the cleanest timeline in the world. But yeah, Fairy's text, it goes from 0% faded, and then 43, and then it's fully gone by here, basically. Same goes for all the other text. I think that's about it for the book flip transition. It's just keyframing these specific layers at that point. Like, once you figure out the basic transition, it's just keyframing it to make each render positioning, because the renders are positioned differently for each team, as you can clearly see. And then figuring out how to transition the text without making it look wrong. I guess the last thing that I can go over for the main core part of this intro is the titling of the book. So this is a very minor detail, but I think it adds a lot to the intro. So Season 11 is a profitable path, but I feel like having it say Pathfinder 11, I felt like the Roman numerals worked better in this situation here. Having it say Pathfinder 11, a profitable path. We're going with kind of a more antique style with the faded book almost. And the text in general was kind of more faded. I felt like the Roman numerals fit better. So that's why I had Quill send me that, Pathfinder XI, not 11. And then we have those positioned on the top at a very low scale. Scale 25, as you can see. It's scaled down a lot, positioned to be at the top of the page. But at the same time as that, we have the page numbers as well, which is going to be right above here. And these work a little bit differently. So what goes on here is that we have 1 and 2. They're just going to fade in like normal. And they're just going to be in the corner. But when it comes to the page turn, we have to do things a little bit wacky. So the page number 2 is going to disappear on this middle frame when the page basically disappears. But the number 4, because we're turning from pages 1 and 2 to 3 and 4, it appears directly on this frame. I don't need to crop it at all because the text is small enough for it to literally just be a 1 frame transition, so I can just drop it right there. So that's why the 4 comes in on that layer. And then it says 1 and 4 there, but that's technically right because when you're turning the page of the book, yada, yada, yada. But then the number 3 has to come in at the start of this page coming in. You can barely see it there. You can start to see it. You can start to see it. Whereas the number 1 doesn't get fully covered up until this frame here. I can just 1 frame transition it out. But then once the transition is done, I have it come back up to the core 2 layers. It's a messy sequence, but that's how it goes for the rest of the intro with the page numbers. Basically, there really isn't that much more variation to it. I got into a rhythm when doing it, where it was just, all right, well, you go over 5 frames here, you go back 2 frames for that number, and then you start it here, and yada, yada, yada. I was able to copy-paste a lot of the page number stuff. I think that's mostly it. There's really not too much else special about the player under, so I guess the next thing I can go on to is the end credits. So when we get to the end credits right here, it's the same book flip page transition thing. But because there were 2 people that organized Pathfinder, there's Joey and Americ, I had to kind of have them follow up in succession quite rapidly. And then same with the intro by me and Quill. Quill is up there very briefly. Once it's more of the same that I did for the rest of this intro. It's the crop that allows it to come in the edge feather. Then it's the book page transition that's the same that I've been doing for most of it. And then we have renders by Yellowbit, and then we get to the end here. And this is really messy because I had to rethink how I wanted to do this end sequence a lot. So you'll see that the timeline basically disappears at this point because I had copied most of this sequence into its own thing. Which made it this kind of difficult to work around because what I wanted to have happen was the original plan was for me to have the logo appear and then zoom in on the logo. So I did that. And then I realized that I messed up the credits at one point. I forget exactly how I messed them up. Oh, I remember what happened. I forgot to put Katie as the merchant in this intro originally. So I had finished this end sequence thing where it zooms in on the logo, but I forgot to put Katie in. So I had to resync up all of this text. And in doing so, I kind of fucked up for myself at the end here. But really, there isn't that much more to explain here. It's a very similar principle to the background and book sequence that I have down here, where the end sequence, it's just, it's the same book flip transition that I did for the rest of it. The logo comes in, and the only interesting thing that really happens is, I use this end sequence to, as the song is fading out, I have a slight skew. This adds a lot of perspective to it. It kind of disguises the fact that the book is like a PNG file and not like a 3D, like actual book. Like it kind of looked here. It looks like it's like a book more or less. But when you start to skew it, you can see that it's clearly just a drop shadow effect. But still, the reason I wanted to do this zoom in and skew effect, was to make the logo more visible. Katie did a fantastic job on the logo and put a lot of small details on it. In fact, I can probably zoom in and you can see that, on the coin it says, "In Katie we trust," and then it's Katie, and then there's Joey, it's Profitable Path, Pathfinder Season XI, Pathfinder Ultra Hardcore. It's just a fantastic logo that Katie made here. And I wanted to make it more visible because at a distance you can't see all those small details. And for how cool the logo is, and to kind of give a proper finish to this intro, I felt like that was the best thing to do. And then the song fades out. We have a Gaussian blur that fades it out all the way in the end, along with the sun rays that starts to fade out. And that's about it for Pathfinder Season 11 intro. I don't think I missed anything about this intro. It's rather complex. I didn't explain too much of it, but it's complex but simple at the same time, this intro. So hopefully I explained everything. I think my job here is done. So I hope you all enjoyed, this episode of the making of Pathfinder Season 11. And I will see you all next time.